Grand Prairie 2018 budget review. Everybody's here. We made it to everybody before coming in. Obviously shoveled their sidewalks again. Wow, I can't believe that it won't stop snowing. It seems like you do all that good work one night just to get up in the morning and find that all that shoveling has gone to waste. Might as well have just waited. Well, welcome everybody. We'll get underway today. I believe we have budget presentations from different service areas, and I'll throw it over to the city manager to get us underway.
Thank you, Mayor Gibbon, and thank you, members of council and administration, for showing up for day two. It was a full day yesterday, and in fact, I thought I'd take a couple of minutes and just recap what happened yesterday, and use that to frame our discussions that we'll commence today. In fact, somebody out in the hall suggested to me, perhaps this is a new business adage for us. There's no better way to get to know each other than to do a budget together. So to the new members on council, getting to know you through budgeting is an interesting exercise, and hopefully we stay aligned through the whole process. To the members of council that were here during the last term, my father, bless his soul, used to say a man never crosses the same river twice. So we will get to know each other again in this meeting and others going forward. Just a quick recap of yesterday. It was an interesting day. We heard from CIBC, and I thought there was some interesting content in the CIBC Grande presentation that's relevant for us today. The observation that the millennials are starting to work, and that's causing a new driver in the economy, both in Canada and the US, was an interesting observation. Pretty much all of the indicators that we're seeing as presented by CIBC are signaling a strengthening economy in North America. Oil prices reaching some level of stability. So we've been subjected for quite some time now to some pretty wild swings in oil prices, and now starting to see what the analysts refer to as a range-bound movement. So we're seeing $10 plus or minus movements in price of oil, which is a range-bound movement that starts to get predictable. And when it's predictable, we can start to make investment decisions, and we'll start to see higher levels of activity just arising from the certainty, increased levels of certainty that result from range-bound movements in commodity prices. Natural gas, they were much more bearish on, largely because there's still an awful lot of natural gas behind pipe and in the ground, so there's capacity to meet any increase in opportunity that will exist in the natural gas business. Fortunately, because we're on the crossover, the Duvernay and the Montney, our natural gas is not the dry gas that's most vulnerable to the bearish prices in that commodity. Because we've got liquids, we do see our movement, or the investment that's occurring up here, much different than what's occurring in many, many other gas-producing areas in the country and on the continent. We did hear a concern, though, when CIBC was talking about the buffering some of the optimism that they're seeing in the North American economy. We heard a concern that I thought was quite relevant for Grande Prairie. They talked about small business growth waning in Canada, and that small business growth in Canada has traditionally been about a third of the economy. And when small business is not prospering and not growing and not picking up the slack, that's a concern in terms of how long and how sustainable growth patterns might be in the economy. Their perspective was, of course, North America and even Canadian national-wide perspective. In Grande Prairie, we may have an even heightened vulnerability to anything that curtails growth in the small business sector. We tend to be, as you know, a much more entrepreneurial center, and small business is a big part of what it takes to make Grande Prairie successful. So we'll have to be sensitive to that. And we heard about the likely range of the Canadian dollar to the US dollar being in the 70 to 75 cent range over the foreseeable future. That's not unhealthy for trade. It's not bad for commodities that are priced in US dollars that are produced in Canada. So everything from forestry, agriculture, and petrochemical or oil and gas. The 70 to 75 cent dollar is not a bad thing for us. We then saw Brian pick that very theme up, and there were no real inconsistencies between what Brian was saying and what CIBC Grande was saying. But Brian took it to a more local and regional level. He pointed out that Grande Prairie is strengthening quickly, with virtually all growth indicators outpacing the Alberta growth indicators, and certainly the indicators at a national level. That's a good thing. He pointed out that our assumptions for 2018 coming from CMHC and internal estimates of what's going on in the community could see housing starts in Grande Prairie from the in the range of 309 or 290 to 305 new housing starts in 2018. That's virtually double 2017 levels. So when we talk about 300 housing starts in a community of 68,000 people, it doesn't sound like a lot, but doubling from one year to the next is a level of activity that will certainly be felt by us. The hospital project Brian touched on could add upwards of 500 new jobs into the area and GDP contribution of over $270 million. Those are very significant numbers. We need to be ready as a municipality. We need to be ready for that hospital to open. It is going to cause land use changes, traffic pattern changes, and new demands on the community as we start to integrate that kind of growth. Brian's stats got very granular too in terms of where we're seeing the impact in the community, and you feel it, and I'm sure you feel it in conversations with constituents as well. Drilling activity year on year in Grande Prairie up 158%. That's a huge number, and it is not occurring elsewhere in the province. We're not seeing in southern Alberta, particularly in the gas-dominated markets in southern Alberta, anything like that kind of increased activity. And it's not just drilling. They're not just drilling and tying into pipelines. There was a 73% increase in facility investments as well. So when we're looking at these over-dimensional load permits coming through Grande Prairie, largely going out of Grande Prairie and into the southern areas or the south regions from Grande Prairie, those over-dimensional load permits are now at record levels. And they're reflecting that kind of increased investment. So I thought and I hope you felt that the session that we spent on the economy, both from a national and North American perspective, as well as Brian's contribution from a local and regional level, was useful and helps us to frame the challenges and opportunities that are going to face Grande Prairie over the next year and certainly in the years to come. We then spent quite a bit of time on priority-based budgeting, and that was a very conscious decision on the part of management to stop and spend some time on priority-based budgeting. That transition is underway, and we wanted a couple of things to be very, very clear. The first thing was that the transition to priority-based budgeting is not radically new for Grande Prairie. So we're not looking at changing night into day. In fact, the use of the citizen budget tool over the past 4 years really was the genesis or the origins, or had its origins in trying to prioritize what this community would like to see as areas of concentration for the municipal government, areas of investment for the municipal government. So the idea of prioritizing and meeting priorities with budget allocations is not new to us. Secondly, that the transition ought to be eased to some degree because we also engage in a relatively thorough base level or base service review process that does track KPIs at a very detailed level, does compare them year on year, going back considerable periods of time in order to pick up trends within our community, and comparing those kinds of KPIs to other municipalities so we can get a feel for how Grande Prairie does things, how it performs relative to others. So the issues of priority-based budgeting are not changing night into day, but they are going to increase the level of focus that council will apply to the prioritization of investment, of resources and money and people in the execution of the responsibilities of the local government. And that exercise will involve you very directly over 2018 at a very detailed level. It will also complement some of the other initiatives that are underway, the lean business process improvement methodologies that will focus on getting our dialogue between management and council into a much more quantifiable, measurable dialogue that talks about the things that we can achieve and then holds us accountable for making sure that those achievements occur. The other thing I guess that we wanted to make sure was clear in doing that kind of a focused presentation on PBB is that there's a lot of work left to be done. On council's part, it will start actually with the strategic planning process in February, but it will carry on through 2018 in a very big way, and hopefully get at the level of detail that people want to get involved in making sure that the priorities of the community are served by the municipal organization. The key role for council really focuses on the point that I think the Resource X people made over and over again, that strategy is paramount, that there's no point in building budgets that don't contribute to strategy. And so the strategy exercise needs to be able to articulate the results the council wants to see in the community, the priorities that council sees in the community, and the relative, even down to the relative investment in what we will ultimately refer to as Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4 priority levels in the organization. So how does council see us allocating resources to ensure that those priorities are met? Lots of work to do on administrative side as well, and we are currently involved in doing that, making sure that people are trained and understand what we're doing, making sure that your organization is aligned and able to deliver. If we're going to take this priority-based budgeting approach into this community, we need to be able to deliver it reliably year on year. It's change in the organization, and I'm sure all of you realize that change management is a big process of introducing anything that's radically new or that is new, even if it isn't radical. So we're underway on that front as well. In any event, the PBB exercise was in part to assure you that a very high level of detail will be gleaned in the involvement between the community and council, the community and management and council, to ensure that we get solid budgeting going forward that really does reflect the optimal allocation and investment of resources in Grande Prairie. We then moved to the high-level 2018 budget review and talked about the fact that the budget review this year is for the very first time introducing scenario budgeting. So we're already in the midst of some pretty radical organizational change that is causing people to have to plan in their departments, in their divisions, at various levels of funding. These are realities that I'm sure many business owners and business operators in council and in the community would be quite familiar with. It's not a technique that has been used in Grande Prairie in budget preparations in the past, and so it's new, and it was well embraced, and I think we did a good job at putting it together. The divisions will present their details on that later this morning. The changes that are required to execute those kind of scenarios through the organization, though, are going to be formidable. So once we finish with the budgeting and once we get at the direction from City Council, your organization has a lot of work to do to make sure that we actually deliver on whatever comes out of these exercises. The first year then will be what we're referring to internally as challenging both physically and emotionally. So it's a lot of work to be done, and it's also a significant change from times in the past, and hopefully changes for the better. The organization, though, is fully committed to making this happen and to making sure that you get the budget information, budget involvement, and the budget performance that you expect from the organization every year. This, in terms of where we go from here, we did have a bit of a discussion yesterday about the management team respectfully requesting that council provide what we're referring to as a high-level budget direction for 2018, which has not always been the case in the past. So many councillors will have seen it differently in years before, and new councillors coming in may have had different kinds of expectations. The respectful request for a high-level direction for 2018 is really to give us a chance to get that transition year in place so that we can rearrange the organization, rearrange the priorities, rearrange the work patterns in the organization to make sure that we're delivering on that kind of budgeting going forward. You will see, as I pointed out, much more level of detail as we move forward through PBB. and that the other thing you ought to be assured of, or you can be assured of, and we'll make sure that we measure this and demonstrate it to you in our communications with you, is that the execution of the budget as we go forward in 2018 and in years beyond 2018 will be aligned to your strategic priorities, and we will speak to those strategic priorities as we move forward. So for today then, there will be a series of divisional presentations from the directors of each one of the divisions. Each one of them is prepared to go through each of the scenarios. They'll give you a high-level overview, and then they'll go through the scenarios. What did it take to get from the original arithmetic extrapolation down to the base case, down to the first target, and down to the second target? They'll go through that. This kind of an exercise is no doubt going to surface a lot of ideas around the table, both in council and management. And with respect, I'm going to try and encourage that we test ourselves, and this is a request for the management team and for council, that we test ourselves when the ideas emerge as to whether those ideas are strategic and policy-oriented, or whether they're getting down into too operational a level. And if they're strategic and policy-oriented, let's deal with them for sure in the time that we have together for the budget. If they're not strategic or policy level, it doesn't mean we ignore them. They will be taken by management and returned to you with answers, with directions, with advice. We have committee structures that allow us to do that quite fluidly. So anything that is at a more granular level that you need to message through to the organization, don't think that because we're saying stay out of the weeds, that the weeds aren't important. The weeds are important as well. Everything that we do here is important. So we'll make sure that that dialogue is facilitated, but in setting the direction at the budget, we'll try, and I'll try to give you my advice as to whether or not we're at a strategic level, and with respect, if everybody can do that, we can check each other off as well. So today, we're hoping at least the divisional presentations today, if we get done early, we'll move right into strategic deliberations and get at the what is on your agendas for day 2, or day 3, pardon me. But today is really a presentation day and a Q&A day where you get a chance to interact directly with the divisions. And each one of the directors will be able to take you through Q&A on any of the areas that they're presenting on. So it isn't targeted to be a, quote, voting day on the specifics. There'll be lots of time for voting when we get to tomorrow and setting the high-level direction. But please feel free to interrupt any of the presentations that you hear today, to engage in Q&A, and hopefully we'll get through every issue and every idea that surfaces at that level as the day goes on. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be pleased to turn it over to the directors to start us into the divisional perspectives.
Thanks very much, Bob. And so I guess we'll recognize Director Grande.
Okay, good morning. My name is Horacio Galanti. I'm the Director of Infrastructure and Protective Services, and I will be presenting the scenario budget on the operational component, and we'll be doing a review of the capital component of the budget as well. At the end of the presentation, you will see a table comparing the 3 scenarios on the operational side, what we call the base scenario at 4.2% tax impact, the 3% scenario, and the 0% scenario. Also, I will be talking about the items that have been referred by a committee to these budget deliberations and recommended by management. Also, you will see items referred by committee but not recommended by management. Those items are part of a strategic conversation that may happen today or tomorrow. With that, I will start with the first scenario that we call base. And in order to achieve this level of reduction on the budget, and as you may recall from yesterday, we started at 6% or $6.8 million shortfall to cover. So in meetings with the different departments, we prepare some adjustments that you're seeing on these scenarios. Adjustments may mean reduction on expenditures or increase in revenue. So I will explain which one is corresponding on this table. So I will go department by department with an explanation about what is included on those numbers on the screen. The first line is fire department, and particularly within fire department is the fire prevention office or branch of this department. We have identified an adjustment that in this case is a reduction on expenditures of $300,000 for this branch. And there are two components within this number. When we presented the 4-year budget back in 2014, we had a chart identifying full-time equivalent FTE positions as we progress over the years, 2014, 15, 16, 17, and 18. In 2018, one fire prevention officer, one FTE, was identified in the chart. In this particular case, we may delay the recruitment of that position, and that will free up about $150,000. The other component that was budgeted originally on the 4-year cycle is another $150,000 for an accommodation term, a person who needed to be accommodated in a different branch because of particular skills, was accommodated in the fire prevention branch. However, that person retired in 2017. However, the funding is still available, budgeted in 2018, so we don't need that component in 2018. That is the total of $300,000 for this particular branch. The next line is as well fire department, but here we're talking operational in general. So we identified a reduction on $162,000 on the operating budget, and the direct impact here is pretty much reduction in training, attendance to conferences, and reduction of some of the programs that the fire department provides to the community, like Fire Prevention Week, Learn Not to Burn, career fairs, home shows, Municipal Government Day, and participation with some community partners. So there will be an impact on some of the educational component, educational programs and training that the fire department does. The next line is enforcement services. In this case, the adjustment is an increase in revenue, $120,000. As you may be aware, the South Monroe's parking lot has been used informally over the years in front of the RCMP detachment area. So in order to improve the drainage and the operations of the area, we decided to compact the grounds, provide some gravel, make it more efficient, and because there's a shortage of parking in that area, we will be pay parking. So we have a wait list of potential users for that parking lot. And we ran some calculations at 50% utilization rate, which is a realistic number, initially at least for the first year or two. And that will generate about $60,000 per year. Also, yesterday you heard about the Travis permits or over-dimensional permits. It's a significant increase in volume of traffic crossing city limits. And that increase was not budgeted initially because we didn't forecast that 4 years ago. However, that means another $60,000 extra revenue. So that's $120,000 that you see there. The next line is Transportation Department, and this is an adjustment of $350,000. It's a reduction on the operating budget. On an average winter, on the residential side of snow removal, we usually execute 5 sweeps or 5 passes using contractors. That's on an average winter. The last couple of years, we did 3 passes. The proposal here to reduce the budget in $350,000 is to reduce the planned 5 rotations to 3. If there is a need for more rotations on the residential side, we can tap into the winter stabilization reserve. The reserve has a capacity of $2.8 million at ceiling, and we have about $2.6 million right now, so we're at pretty much 95%. So there is funding available to cover, and we feel confident about this number. The next line is inspection services. Or
Director Galante, before you get away, and so just as we start the day, council members ring in, and management as council members ring in, I'll try to break in quickly so that we're on the topic that you were discussing, where the question most likely comes. Councillor Clayton.
Mayor Given. Director Galante, just a couple of questions on snow removal expenditures. So the reserve is, the policy says the reserve can be up to $2.6 million, or is there a max on it and it's at 2.6?
The ceiling of the reserve is 2.8.
Okay.
And the reserve is currently at 2.5, 2.6.
And remind me what the annual snow removal costs are on an average 10-year snowfall?
The annual budget for snow is about $5 million.
Okay, and when you say 5 passes, so to reduce from 5 passes to 3 passes, that's on the new program where we do it, you know, the day, your garbage removal day, assuming normal snowfall, we would do the complete city 5 times, or just priority ones 5 times?
This component of the reduction, the adjustment, is only on the residential side. We are not planning to change anything on priority 1 and 2 transit routes, emergency service routes. This is only the residential component.
And not to start a sort of sidebar discussion, but that's assuming we get to every neighborhood 5 times, because it may not happen.
So one pass takes in total 2 weeks, yep. 1 sweep on the residential side. So the reduction proposed here is to reduce the average 5 passes to 3. And if we need to do it more because of Mother Nature, we may use the winter stabilization reserve to compensate for the shortfall.
And I know you're going to go a little bit more into this. I think you're going to go a little more discussion into snow removal changes, but tell me, on the 3 passes, what would trigger you to get into the reserve for it to start, you know, how much snow, how often? If you're down to 3 passes, what's going to trigger the activation of using some of the reserve? Is it an amount of snowfall? Is that as it was before, and is the parameter still the same?
Yes, that is correct, Councillor Clayton. The policy 606 is snow and ice control. Clearly establishes the trigger point on the different priority routes. Could be 7.5 centimeters of snow accumulated or 10 centimeters of snow accumulated, depending the priority. So we will follow policy 606, and if needed, more passes will be triggered, and the snow reserve will be tapped at that time.
So Director Galante and Councillor Clayton, maybe just on this, would it be fair to characterize this as administration rather than budgeting in more cushion into the base budget to running closer to the line and having a heavier reliance on using reserves if needed?
Yes, this is a likelihood of occurrence, pretty much. It's a statistical analysis. We know that the cycle takes about 7 years for bad winters, average to mild, and back to bad winters. So we're running some numbers. The last 2 winters have been mild. that's the reason that we were able to almost top up the winter stabilization reserve. And the reserve is pretty much at max right now. So if this winter or next winter is, again, a heavy winter, we can play with that likelihood and deplete the reserve to a point that is safe, but it's at 95% today. So we feel confident to present these numbers to council.
And just one last question. This is 3 passes at the tradition or the current standard, which doesn't have, which creates windrows and driveways.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will continue with the Inspection Services Department. The total adjustment proposed here is about $18,000, and the proposal is to eliminate other consulting services. So for some particular projects, very specialized, we may need to use specialized consultants. For example, when it comes to code equivalencies, project like the new hospital, for example, when the applicant may propose alternative solutions, not typically specified in the codes. So there's a need sometimes to use external expertise. We feel confident that we can deal with this matter in-house with our in-house expertise, our level 1, 2, and 3 inspectors. And there is nothing in the works right now beyond the capacity of the department. So we feel confident to do this adjustment. The next item is GIS. Our GIS department pretty much operates at capacity, and they have some funding available to outsource some services if there's a peak. Pretty much the same way that inspection services operates. In this case, the reduction proposed is almost $57,000. Pretty much eliminating other professional services or other consulting services. This is a reduction that is sustainable in the short term, not in the long term. The level of service internally to the organization can be sustained with this reduction for a couple of years. However, if the land development and economic activity increases again, then the need to use external consultants or outsource some of the components of the department will be needed. So for now, we feel confident for 2018 to present this adjustment, and of course will be revised if needed next year. Finally, environmental services. The proposed adjustment is a reduction of $23,000. And this can be absorbed mostly through the change in delivery of different programs. The removal of the utility cabinet wrapping program is one component. The community garden program that was planned to be relocated, it won't. And there will be some reductions on staffing time from 5 to 4 days a week, which may impact the delivery and engagement with the community as well. So in total, the adjustment to reach the base scenario, that is the 4.2% tax impact for this division, is about $1,030,000. This will bring the original budget of $61,196,000 to $60,165,000. I will proceed with the presentation of the 3% budget scenario. As a start point, we will start with the $60,165,000. That is the end point of the base scenario. Okay? That's a new start point. That's a new baseline. So in this case, we have identified additional departments. And you will see at the end on a table comparing in a color code fashion that will be very easy to understand the different scenarios. So these departments are in addition to the department you heard already in base. So crime prevention is a department that has been identified with some potential adjustment under the 3% scenario. with the amount of $42,000. Inside this number is the elimination of one summer position and one temporary position. The summer position covers the Cultural Integration Academy summer camps, and the temporary position is to offset the reduced work week that we have right now with one person. Also, there will be a reduction of one full-time position to 4 days a week instead of 5. And there will be some reduction on advertising cost. Crime prevention provides multiple programs to the community, and they advertise constantly on radio, on the website, and media, different media channels. So there will be a reduction on the advertisement.
Director Galante, see Councillor Bressi.
Thank you. I'm curious about this cultural integration summer camp. Would this mean the camp is done, or it would still happen with less help?
The summer camp may happen using reallocating internal resources. So it's still possible. However, probably the duration will be adjusted as well.
Thanks, Councillor Bressi. I also see Councillor Friesen.
Thank you, Mayor Given. Director Galante, that adjustment, given all of the items that you mentioned, that seems like not very much. Can you speak to that?
The numbers presented are totaling the necessary adjustment to reach the 3% budget scenario in combination with the other divisions. So it's a mathematical calculation that when you add all the adjustments on the different divisions, the overall city's budget will achieve a 4.2%, a 3%, or a 0% impact.
I'm speaking, though, specifically to the crime prevention of 42,000, and you mentioned a number of those things. Are those just suggestions to achieve that 42?
Correct.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. Next line is the engineering department. The proposed adjustment is a reduction on about $160,000. Again, back in 2014, when the FTE charts, the progression and evolution of positions in the city was presented, there was one technical position pre-approved and budgeted in 2018 for the engineering department. This role won't be recruited in 2018. It belongs to the development engineering branch, and we feel confident to delay this recruitment due to the relatively low development activity right now in the community. If the economy remains status quo, we can address the demands for service with current staffing levels. However, if we see an increase in the economy, and particularly on the land development component, then we may appear in front of council with a review of this position. Also, there are some adjustments on miscellaneous items like mileage, advertising, phone, etc. for 50,000. So that is the total component of 160. Next item is the transportation department. So this is a further reduction of 315,000. So a few minutes ago, I explained the initial reduction. What we plan to do was to reduce the snow residential removal component from
Director,
5.
Before you get off to that, I've got a couple of councillors in the queue. I see Councillor Palat first.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I guess just on the engineering, I'm just wondering, and I certainly don't want to get in the weeds here, but if what do we expect on a typical year for development to be able to require, like for the staff requirements we currently have? If we're saying that, you know, we haven't had a lot of development coming, so we can hold off on a full-time equivalent for now. What do we kind of need to have as a flow for lots being brought on, or commercial development or industrial, to sustain the staffing levels we have now? And I guess I'm just kind of speaking to last year, there was virtually no development, and, you know, some optimism that there's development coming back. If we didn't hire that full-time person, is there somewhere down the road where we have to hit a number where we say, if there's this many lots coming on or this much, we need another body, or we just can't sustain a good level of service?
In engineering, we have about 27 positions. On the capital side, on the traffic side, on the development side, we try to cross-train as much as possible to provide cross-coverage for situations like this. So if there is an increase, I would say up to 20% perhaps on the land development activity, we can still manage the workload. If we see a significant impact or a rapid increase, beyond 20%, I would say, to put the number, 20-25% compared with previous year, that will trigger another full-time person. This person is a relatively senior position. So again, depending the complexity of the site, sometimes we have developments with 100 lots, complex lots of utilities, trunk mains, etc. Sometimes multiple smaller developments, so easier to manage with current resources. So depending the complexity, I would say, it's not only the total number of lots, but also the complexity, the number of interaction with external agencies, utility companies, etc. That will trigger the new FD.
So I guess more on a KPI level, just trying to get my head around, we can look at permits for housing starts, and we can kind of track a 10-year history of what we like. Do we have similar KPIs of, how many service lots or how many acres we brought on for multi-commercial industrial yearly, that we could look at a kind of a servicing average over a 10-year period when we're looking at staffing this area?
Yeah, that is correct, Councillor Pilat. We have trends for all these departments, for example, planning and development, inspection services, engineering. We typically analyze trends over the last 10 years, and that is a tool we use for forecasting revenue on the next budget cycle. In addition to intelligence gathered in conversations with corporations and developers, builders, that they can feed us information about what's in the works for them. Of course, nothing is written in stone at 100% when you project that 4 years in advance. So keep in mind, this is the 4th year of the budget cycle. So the level of uncertainty in 2018 is much higher compared with the uncertainty in 2015.
Okay, I think that was I think our other question will maybe come up at a later point. So please continue on.
Okay, thank you. So the transportation department, reduction here is $315,000 proposed. I mentioned previously the reduction from 5 planned rotations to 3 on the residential side. So in addition to that, there will be a reduction on gravel purchase. Under the newly annexed area, the rural service area, we took over a lot of gravel roads that we need to maintain currently. So the proposed reduction is a reduction from $350,000 to $180,000 on the gravel, which will impact the gravel maintenance program. Also, we will reduce 2 temporary positions that are year-round working for transportation. So from 12 positions to 10 positions, that will give us $146,000 in savings. The impact of that is less equipment utilization and loss of field labor that will result in less projects complete and different level of service on the gravel roads. There will be also some delays with windrows on Priority 1 and 2 because these people drive snow haul trucks. So the windrows in the center of the road may stay longer, and in the summertime will be less asphalt and concrete projects completed. That is the impact of this new adjustment on transportation.
Thanks, Director Galante. I see Councillor Bressi.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I'm curious, do you know if, as we're seeing these service reductions in the rural service area, do you have any idea how this would compare to the service these residents would have been receiving if they'd remained in the county? So do you know how our proposed service would compare with the county service? Do you? Yeah, you might not, and that's fine.
When we took over the new roads, the gravel roads, our target was to provide the same or better level of service than previously proposed by the county. So in this case, we will be establishing priorities. We have some sort of condition assessment and identified spots where we need to attack first in terms of gravel road maintenance. So we will redirect resources to those critical areas first. And again, depending the weather in the summer months, because gravel roads are subject to freeze-thaw cycles on spring and fall, we will have to prioritize where to dedicate resources. So the level of service will have an impact for sure.
So, and you said that you've been targeting equal or better service than the county. So currently, is your assessment that we're hitting that better target or hitting that equal? Are we? So with this, do you think we're going to be having, these people are going to be having degraded services if they would have stayed in the county, or do you have a feel for that?
It's hard to comment because the number of kilometers of roads. We will do our best with the resources available and approved by council to provide an excellent level of service. That is our target all the time.
Okay.
Thank you.
I see Councillor O'Toole also has a question.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. We do have a gravel crushing or concrete crushing program, so we still have resources to draw from there, correct?
It is correct to a point. We use some of the gravel in the recycled plant. However, that gravel has river and some metal that we try to remove. So we use mostly that material for as a granular base for the pathways and sidewalks program. We have been using that type of material in the past for the gravel roads, but we had many complaints about metal on the roads. So we kind of discontinued that practice.
Thank you very much.
I see Councillor Platt.
Thanks, Mayor Given. Just wondering if there was, as we got going to I guess, Councillor Bressy's question about service levels from the county to where we may go, if there was, hypothetically 6 months into the year, we're like, man, we're missing this. We need more gravel. We're short here. Is there a reserve fund that this would come out of if you guys deem that it was just short, or would it just be like that status quo for the year now? I'm just kind of curious because I don't know if it would fit into a snow removal or a budget somewhere else that we could look at.
No, there is no specific reserve fund for gravel roads. We'll have to tap into general reserves like a financial stabilization reserve, for example, if needed.
Thank you.
Okay, so next item is...
Sorry, Director Galante, I gave you the nod to go ahead, and then I looked at my board, and Councillor Minhas is there as well. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor Wilkin. Gracious is, did we add any more equipment to look after the annex land? We have more gravel roads than before, or are we using the same equipment to compromise this?
We added a grader and truck as well. So there was an adjustment on the transportation budget when we incorporated the new areas. I believe the number was about $1 million additional. For Susan is giving me the okay. So is that the correct figure? So yes, we added about $1 million for the to cover everything related to maintenance on the annexed area.
So that mean that will be in 18 budget, or it was done on 17?
Has been done before already, so it's budgeted.
Thank you.
Good, okay. So next department is planning and development. The adjustment proposed for this department is about $73,000. And the items inside that number is some reductions in training and conferences. Keep in mind that this is a highly technical department. They need to maintain certification for the designations they have, but they felt confident in 2018 in adjusting this number. So they will reduce the training budget in 50%. There will be some postponement of replacement of a plotter to plot large plans. Some licenses that they don't need to be renewed, advertising costs, phone, other miscellaneous will make up the $73,000. But if I need to highlight one item, will be the reduction on the training budget for this department. Okay. So the next department is GIS. The figure now presented is about $42,000. So in addition to eliminating the ability to outsource some of the work, in this case, everything will be done in-house, and that would have an impact on the service levels across the organization. Keep in mind, GIS is a hub. Pretty much every department is using GIS services. All our mapping services, geodatabases, georeference information is being used pretty much by all departments in the organization. So there may be some delays on providing services internally. Also, we will have some impact on training. There is a 50% reduction on training for this department, which is important due to the very dynamic nature of the GIS world. Other services that may be impacted is the parcels and basic infrastructure, the cadastral fabric, depending the level of activity. We feel confident with this adjustment. If the economic activity remains status quo, we can manage the workload. If there is an increase on land development, again, new lots created, new utilities on the ground, they need to incorporate those assets into the GIS system, and there can be a challenge to manage. Also, very important component here is the microfilm with all record drawings. So the city maintains microfilms, and this is being outsourced. In a case of a significant disaster in the community, that all infrastructure is lost in terms of servers and digital infrastructure, we maintain physical, like the old negatives, photographic negatives, microfilms for all as-built record drawings. So that's being outsourced, and we don't have the lab or the capacity to do that. So this is an impact as well on this department.
Director Galante, I have a question. Councillor Palat.
Thank you, Given. I guess something's not adding up to me. When I look at the 2017 budget for GIS, it says $1.349,421,000. And under the target one scenario, it says $1.29728, which would be a difference of $58,693. But these two line items between the two scenario budgets add up to $98,646. So there's a difference of $39,953. I'm just wondering if I'm missing something there.
The administration is conferring. We'll let them.
Thank you.
Our Corporate Services Director.
Thank you, Mayor Given. How we built these scenarios is we took the 2018 budget as it existed in the previous plan, and then we made reductions to that. So there were changes made in the 2018 plan, in the original plan, that would not be added into the total of the reductions that you're seeing.
Okay. It does. I guess from what I was just looking at the 2017, the annual budget is the baseline, I guess, when I was looking at the pluses and minuses, and it was, almost $40,000 difference to what's being presented to what was on the base budget number. So that clarifies that, though. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the difference in total for these adjustments compared with the previous scenario with base is about $631,000, bringing the new line for protective services and infrastructure to $59,500,000.
See, Councillor Plott.
Maybe this is just a continuation of my last question, but when I look at the 2017 budget for infrastructure and protective services, It was 57,449,425, big number, sorry, 57 million-ish. And under the target one scenario, it still goes up by $2,085,000 or 3.6% from the 2017 budget. Is that again because it's adjusted against the 2018 working backwards? But I guess just we are increasing our 2017 budget in this area by 3.6%, even at a 3% target. Is that accurate?
Correct. Yes.
Director Galante?
That's correct.
And so just so that everybody else is, and actually, sorry, I wanted to say for everybody else, for me, so that I can make sure that I've got it as well in the context of Councillor Plott's question. The 4.2%, 3% or 0% are based on the 2018 forecasted budget, which may also increase. So reductions in the 2018 forecasted budget, not the overall 2017 budget. Is that correct? I'm seeing people nod, but nobody else can hear you nod.
Thank you, Mayor Given. So we used the 2018 original budget as our base. That budget had embedded in it inflation adjustments, revenue adjustments to come to the original 2018 bottom line. And then to build the scenario budgets, we went through an exercise where we made reductions. So we made reductions based on the original 2018 budget to come down to these percentages. So that's why it's not adding, the reductions that we're making in these scenarios aren't adding to the total of the 2018 budget because it already had adjustments in it from 2017. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so I mean, I guess that really, reminds us that we're reviewing the 2018 budget. Right, this is truly a 2018 forecasted budget review rather than reviewing the 2017 budget.
Yes.
Mr. City Manager?
Just by way of clarification in terms of where I hope we'll be going in the future. The future practice will be one in which you see multiple year budgets. So you'll always see an extrapolation of the current budget that's looking for approval into the next 3, 4, perhaps even 5 years. But the comparisons in the future will be to the previous budget rather than to what we thought at the beginning of that planning cycle we would be experiencing by the 3rd or 4th year in the planning cycle. That was the confusion in the exercise that caused us to be at a $6.8 million revenue shortfall in the first place. It's because we're still using a forecast budget that was set back in 2015.
Councillor Plott, I see that you're in the queue. Is there still a follow-up to that?
Yes. Just on that, are we fairly confident the 2017 budgets are fairly, now that the year is almost through, are we fairly confident those numbers, if I'm looking off that as a baseline number, are we confident that the 2017 numbers were accurate, I guess, if that's a fair question? If that's the baseline in my mind I'm trying to work off of, because that's what seems to be the targets where we're basing those numbers off of.
Ms. Walker?
Thank you, Mayor Given. So the 2017 budget is essentially accurate. We have made adjustments to assumptions that we made based on 2017 in 2018, and we recognize those as economic adjustments. So there's kind of two different kinds of adjustments going on here. So there are economic adjustments where we've corrected assumptions, and then there are departmental reductions that the division heads are speaking to. So there is a distinction between the two. So in any given budget year, we do have variances that we project, and I believe the operating surplus forecasted for this year is in the range of $1.5 to $2 million at the moment. So that is the variance between 2017 actual and budget at this point.
Okay, I don't see anybody else in the queue. I think there was one council member that was in and maybe had their question answered in the course of that. So Director Galante.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the next slide is the 0% budget scenario. And I will start again as a start point with the bottom line of the previous slide, that is 59,500,000. And when we met with the different departments, we identified further adjustments for this in order to achieve 0% tax impact. So the new departments impacted with different numbers for this scenario. The first line is the RCMP with an adjustment on expenditures of $600,000. That means the delay in hiring 4 RCMP officers. So a little bit more detail. One position was going to be used to backfill a traffic position, and the 3 remaining was supervisory positions. Not adding this will delay, I would say, the implementation of some strategies, some tactics that were in the works for now. It's a delay. It's a significant impact on the community, but it's a reduction that we need to incorporate in order to achieve 0%.
I see Councillor Pilat.
I'm just looking again, I'm back to the 2017 baseline to the 0% budget. We still have an increase in RCMP spending with a 0% budget of $1,032,000. So is that hiring about 7-ish RCMP, or why is the budget going up by $1 million even on a 0% scenario?
So just before you answer, Director Galante, I think this will be a consistent theme. This is a 0% property tax increase.
I understand,
I think the
understand
base
that,
of the
but
property tax does grow,
yeah.
And is forecasted to grow in the model, and so there will be additional revenue achieved in 2018 that administration is accounting for. And when we talk about a 0%, it's a 0% increase in the rate across the city.
Okay, I guess so. On the information that was provided to us, there is still an increase in RCMP funding from 2017's budget for $1,032,429,000. Is that accurate, or?
Yes, that is correct. So you will see some increases in the different departmental budgets. For example, in this case, the cost per member goes up every year. There is a formula as part of our contract with the RCMP, and the cost per member, it includes salary, benefits, patrol cars, computers, all systems, etc., is increasing, and that's part of the contract. However, the exercise we're going through right now is to identify dollar figures that will bring the tax rate to 0, in this case, 3% or 4.2. So not necessarily is a 0% change between 2017 and 2018. It's the combination citywide, because I'm just presenting a division, but when Susan and Koji will be presenting this afternoon, plus the economic adjustment package that was presented yesterday, when you cook all these numbers together, the impact will be 0, 3, or 4.2. That is kind of the essence, the principle of the exercise.
Okay, I see Councillor O'Toole.
Thanks. Just some clarification here. There's no, this is strictly not hiring process. We're not reducing our support staff. This is strictly officers, correct?
Yeah, that is correct, Councillor O'Toole. This is for RCMP members.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. I don't see anybody else in the queue. Director Galante.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The next department is crime prevention. It's a different adjustment compared with the previous scenario. So it's about $73,000 in this case. So I mentioned the elimination of a summer and temporary position, reduction of 1 full-time position to 2 days per week only. That means that we would have to discontinue some programs, and there is a reduction on the level of service to the community. Also is built into this new number reduction, significant reduction on advertising cost for the programs that crime prevention offers. Next department is engineering. The adjustment in this case is $275,000. So I spoke previously about the elimination of an approved 2018 technical position. In addition to that, there will be a delay in filling one of two current vacant positions. Of course, this position is pending to the capital plan approved and land development activity. As you're fully aware, there is one significant item on the capital plan, and it's the potential continuation of the downtown project. If that project goes ahead, we will have to proceed as well with a senior project manager, and the plan was to use this vacancy to fill that type of role. So this is pending the complexity and amount in the capital plan in total. If we remain status quo, we can delay filling this vacant position right now, in addition to the technical position in 2018. There will be other adjustments on miscellaneous items for $50,000, travel expenses, telephone cost, etc. And there will be some reduction on engineering consultant budget. That we use consultants for a variety of topics, geotechnical labs, some design, etc. So in total, the new number for engineer is $275,000 reduction. The next department is transportation services, and the number presented now as a reduction is $1,151,000 reduction for this department. So I spoke recently about the reduction from 5 planned rotations to 3 on the residential side, the reduction on the gravel component of the budget, the gravel roads, less gravel, less maintenance on gravel roads. Now we are proposing to reduce the temporary positions from 12 to 8. In the previous scenario was from 12 to 10. Now we're reducing from 12 to 8. That gives us $286,000 savings. And the impact of this is we will have 4 fewer snow haul truck drivers in the winter and the same amount of laborers in summer. Also, we'll reduce from 4 street sweepers to 3. That will result in another $72,000 in equipment cost and $71,000 savings in labor on the temps. The impact will be slower spring residential cleanup, and we will eliminate the winter quality control temporary positions that they go in tandem with the snow removal equipment, knocking doors and being sure that cars are removed out of the street, connecting with enforcement services, doing quality control of the winter equipment. In this case, we'll have less supervision of contractors doing snow clearing in residential areas, and potentially more vehicles will remain on the road. In order to compensate for this, we will assign this task to supervisors and lead hands. I want to highlight here, and I will be speaking later on or tomorrow about there's a strategic point here on the snow removal program. We went through an exercise because over the past 2 years we heard that the desire from the community, from some members, to have the windrows cleared on the driveways. So in total, we have about 16,000 driveways in the community, and about 8,200 drivers are or qualified to have a windrow. We have about 1,300 driveways on our database that we do the windrow removal because of any sort of physical impediment to perform those duties. So we have a database where we go and provide the service at no charge for now. However, we identified 8,200 driveways where the windrow is being left. So if you live in a cul-de-sac or in a bulb or on a priority 2 route or in a transit route or near a park, you don't have a windrow because the snow has been accumulated in different fashions. However, for 8,000 driveways, you have a windrow. So we did some exercise about using bobcats. It's a 1-2 movement. Is one scope and two just pretty much generating an opening in the driveway, providing continuity from your garage door to the residential road, to the collector road, to the arterial road. So if there is an emergency, you need to leave your house, you need to enter your house, there is an opening generated. It's not going to be super neat, but it's an opening generated that provides continuity. So you will hear more about that, just as a heads up. At the cost, and we did some small test, so we can refine this. It's about $350,000 per year using this equipment in tandem with the main operations. So you will hear more about that.
Director Galante, just on that, and so that's one of the items council that's specifically identified in the discussions or strategic level discussions for tomorrow. But just on that, is that addition or pilot project possible with the reduced, what I would call sort of snow removal program oversight that you're contemplating in this 1.2 million reduction?
The quality control will be affected for sure, but it still will be done using lead hands and supervisors to a certain extent.
So I'm just trying to get a sense. You sort of referenced in engineering that vacant position may be required if council chose to go ahead with the downtown project. If the capital plan was significantly large, that it wouldn't be possible to do that reduction. If council chooses to go ahead with the enhanced service for windrow clearing, would it be possible to do this reduction in the quality control as well?
I would say not at 100%. We'll still need at least some personnel to perform this. This is an additional level of service. It's an increase in the level of service to the community. And in order to be effective, we need to have people on the ground performing quality control.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the next department is inspection services. The adjustment proposed here is a reduction on almost $31,000 for the department. I mentioned previously the not using consultants, external consultants for code equivalencies, etc. That is $20,000, and the additional $10,000 or $11,000 is a reduction in overtime budget and public relations from the department. Again, this is depending on the level of activity. Overtime is always difficult to forecast, but if we sustain the level of activity in 2018 compared with 2017, we feel confident of reducing the overtime budget in $10,000. And the last department is environmental services.
Before I let you move on, I see Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I'm just on the inspection services. Is there kind of a 10-year floating average where we feel we're confidently staffed, and then if we go up to where we have double the housing starts, that we're, oh boy, there's a problem, and down we're okay? Mm-hmm. Is there kind of a floating number that we feel we're adequately staffed at, I guess is my question.
Yeah, that is correct. Keep in mind that over the last, I would say, 2 years, for the first time in many, many years, we had full complement on the inspection services department. It's one of those departments that is very difficult to recruit and retain inspectors, particularly level 2, level 3 inspectors. So we are pretty much full staff right now, but we have a 10-year trend, and we have the 10-year, we see factual information about number of permits, economic activity, and the number of inspectors on staff. So back in 2012, 13, there was a boom. We had to use external services to keep up with the demand for services. Nowadays, we do everything in-house because it's relatively low. So we use historical information to determine when is the trigger point to use external help in terms of inspections. Thank you. So the final department is energy management and environmental services. The number here proposed for an adjustment is about $41,000, and is pretty much a reduction on advertising, public relations, and the utility cabinet wrapping program, and reduction of a temporary position from 5 days to 4 days a week. So that will give us this amount of adjustment. In total, the new number adjusted compared with the previous scenario, 3%, for the departments mentioned here is $1,264,000, bringing the total divisional budget to $58,270,000 for infrastructure and protective services. So in this chart here, I prepared a table pretty much comparing the different scenarios. And I color-coded this so it's easier to understand. What is yellow is different on the 3% scenario compared with base, and what is orange is new on 0% scenario compared with the previous scenario. So it's a summary of all reductions, and if you compare the initial number, 61,186,000 on the upper left side, on top of base 4.2%, versus the bottom number at the right side, 58,270,000. That is a total reduction on the divisional budget of almost $3 million, $2.9 million, when you compare 0% versus base.
I see Councillor Clayton.
Thank you, Mayor Given. Director Galante, tell me in regards to process here, this is sort of a smorgasbord of items, and if I would like a different mix of what you're suggesting, how and when would you like to discuss that? Maybe that's a question for Mr. Nicolay or for yourself. Not sure.
I see the city manager would like to respond. Mr. Nicolay.
It's a good analogy to a smorgasbord, and I will try to discourage us from seeing these as smorgasbord items. Rather, if we can note as we go along what you have found to be strategically impactful. So if we're talking about cutting our CMP, and that's something that is sacrosanct, that the council believes ought not to happen, then at the end of the day, when council's deliberating on the total budget, if the conclusion of that exercise is that council could support a X% increase, if at all, however, no cuts can be made to police services in the community, then that would be the point to introduce those. And then I think the dialogue with management would be, council is willing to support or believes the community could support an X% increase in the tax rate for 2018. However, these are the items that council believes are strategically sacrosanct and need to be preserved. Management, can you put together a budget that would rationally achieve both of those objectives, both in terms of the allowable tax rate increase and the preservation of key strategic service areas? And management should be able to respond to that question.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. City Manager. So just at an overall divisional level, Director Galante, I've got a question about, there are a number of spots where there were the scenarios contemplated a reduction in number of days per week. Does administration, this, whoever this may be, does management have a suggestion on the impact that may have on our ability to recruit and fill positions, or to maintain positions being filled?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So there are a few departments impacted with the reduction of the work week. At this time, we don't see a significant impact in terms of people leaving the organization due to this relatively minor adjustments. there's some temporary positions to be discontinued. So that's a full reduction. In some other departments, it's a 1 day per week reduction or 2 days per week. It's hard to predict if that person particularly or people will decide to leave the organization, and will have difficulties hiring just for a 0.5 or 0.3 FTE.
Mr. City Manager?
I agree fully with Director Galante's response. And just on a more general note, every one of the scenarios that has been prepared by management is a scenario that we believe we could deliver to the community if needed. And that in the delivery of that budget scenario to the community, we would be able to administratively overcome the kinds of challenges that it might present. Certainly, and I can't overstate this, the 0% would be much, much tougher and will present challenges on a number of fronts. But we are prepared to deliver any of the scenarios. The direction to management was any scenario needs to be something you would be able to do.
I see Councillor Plott.
I just, going through this exercise, I really want to thank our city manager and our directors up here for, I know these aren't or not fun conversations, and it's not fun to go through different scenarios. It takes a long time to go through these line by line items. And I really want to thank you guys for this, because I know I can empathize with this with our own companies. It's not fun to go and start slashing departments where you actually wanted to put money into them. And so it's not a fun exercise. And I just really, I'm very grateful that you guys are even giving us options right now. I think that's speaks really well to my confidence of the directors that we have and our city manager moving forward. So thank you for giving us the opportunity to even have an option of 0% on the table, because I think that speaks really well for our administration. So thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, Councillor Plott. So we are, in terms of our schedule, I think we're just about right on target for where we had a scheduled break. So we're keeping pace with what the agenda laid out. Should we take a, how long do we have in the? 10:30. Shoot for 5. Let's shoot for a 5-minute break. Everybody can stand, stretch, go to the washroom, get a glass of water, and we'll attempt to be back in 5 minutes.
I need to relax.
Okay, we're back with a regular council 5-minute break. So we'll move into infrastructure and protective services capital budget discussion. I don't know if there's any introductory remarks or context, and so we'll look then directly to Director Galante.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I finished the operating component a few minutes ago, I will present an overview about the capital budget 2018. The first slide is a summary with the two major components here, and of course there's one that is significant, is the engineering department capital plan. But we have two items. Under the fire department, the budget for 2018 is $30,000, and that is a fire prevention vehicle. They conduct regular inspections. They have a coordination with safety codes, so they need to drive around the city. And this was a planned vehicle as part of the multi-year kind of a fleet program for the city, and is allocated for 2018. The engineering department has a variety of projects as part of the capital plan. The total amount is $25 million for 2018, and that is what is currently on the books for 2018, and you have a copy line by line in your binders with discrimination about each program and the cost. Also, I would touch base on items that were presented to the former Community Safety Committee before the election, and those items were referred to budget deliberations by the former Community Safety Committee. These items also were vetted by management and recommended by the management team. So there are three items in this category. The first one is land acquisition for future road projects. As part of our long-term capital plan that has a 10-year horizon, we are identifying right-of-ways and small adjustments to lanes or intersections where we need to acquire some land for future use. So we have identified some locations, and in your inbox this morning I circulated some information so you have an idea about these potential locations. Of course, it's land related, so it's a confidential nature for now. We set aside an amount of $2 million to start conversations with landowners in different spots, and there's some sort of priority list that we will tackle first conversations, and council may see over the years an adjustment to this figure as well, because market values they change, and this number is based on previous land acquisitions. The second item is railway crossings. We are conducting safety audits on 8 rail crossings on the north-south line through residential areas. Locations are at 68th Avenue, 99 Avenue, 100 Avenue, 105th Avenue, 108th Avenue, 116th Avenue, 132nd Avenue, and Resources Road. The idea here is to come up with potential upgrades needed in those locations. Can be arms, can be red lights, to potentially avoid whistling. So we're working in coordination with CN Rail. The first step is to conduct the safety audits and identify potential upgrades and cost estimates. So when we have the cost estimates, we'll bring back to council the numbers. But for now, the amount set aside here in the budget, $80,000, is just to conduct the audits.
Director Galante, can we see that list in a written form, either emailed out or even a map form with just markers, a Google map with little markers put on? That'd be really helpful.
Sure, I can send an email with the locations.
I see Councillor Clayton.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I'm a little bit behind and a little bit ahead, so I apologize for the order of these questions. But I know you'll handle it well. Okay, so on the $25 million capital list that it is broken down in page 6 of section 2, if anybody is curious. Traffic signals. For example, 105th Street and 116th Ave, I see it's sort of already there. So are we just not going to pay the bill, or what's the deal with that one? And then I have other questions. These identified traffic signals, just so new councillors are aware, were previously identified as priorities. They were put into this year because we went through the last 4-year budget cycle, took the traffic safety light needs, and allocated them per year. I'm assuming based on traffic flows and numbers, which were down in the last little bit as an economic slowdown, that we kept a constant monitoring on these and none of the priorities have changed, I'm assuming. So if there's a capital budget cut, these won't happen. So my question for you is on the first question is on that one that's already in. What are we doing in regards to that funding? And then my second question is either for you or for possibly Director of Finance. Can we use how much of the transportation levy reserve, remind me where we're at in the levels, minimums, etc., where we could use some of that reserve for some of these traffic signals, or is that a not allowable expense?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the first question is about the allocation in the budget of traffic signals. In this particular budget, we have a very discrete allocation, even showing spots on traffic signals. The intent of management, because of the dynamic nature of the traffic flow and patterns are changing so frequently in the city, in the future you will see a global amount. The intent is to put a global amount for traffic signals per year, and then it will be up to the engineers to determine via warrants where at particular times the physical poles need to be located. So in the capital plan here, you may see allocations where the lights are already in place and some potential allocations planned in 2016, 17, or 18 that happen or not. Because what we do is we have a rolling list of locations and we conduct traffic counts and we run formulas for warrants. So sometimes at the beginning of the cycle, back in 2014, you run the formulas and you run the numbers, and in 2017, intersection of Street A and Avenue B would warrant traffic signals. Over the next 2 or 3 years, for different situations, economy, or there's a school that was built, or a commercial building, the traffic changed, and the warrant is no longer in effect for that particular location. So we want to have more flexibility to have the total amount, but then will be up to the technical experts to determine the location. So in this case, if you see money allocated on the budget and the physical lights are already in place, the traffic signals, that money will be used for another location that can be in the works right now via warrants.
And so at a higher level, if this 25 million, if council wants to reprioritize some of these items, what's the process there, Mr. Nicolay?
Thank you, Mayor Given. We can certainly talk about any one of the projects that are on here. The intention with capital budget is not dissimilar, though, to the intentions with the operating budget, that if they're strategic in nature, if we're talking about pre-servicing a subdivision or not pre-servicing subdivisions, that's a strategic discussion that we ought to be able to have here at council. If they are tactical, if they're at which location are we going to put in what type of signaling, or where will the next crosswalk go, I would respectfully suggest that we not get into a line-by-line review of the capital priorities. Director Grande correctly characterized where we hope to go with capital budgeting in the future. What you have here is a very detailed list, so it's awkward to say, look at the detailed list, but don't opine on it. Really, what we should be saying is that the department will put aside X number of dollars in the current capital budget year, and that number of dollars will achieve all of the priority one signaling projects that engineering department has identified, and 60% of the priority two, leaving the remaining 40% of priority two and all of priority three for future years, or something like that, which is a more strategic, more policy level way of discussing how capital budget dollars will find their way into these types of projects.
Sure. So as we move into priority-based budgeting, that absolutely makes sense. But for this $25 million right now, are these needs to haves, nice to haves? I know they're priorities, but based on what percentage of urgency? Like, I want to know how much of this $25 million capital amount it needs to happen, and what the risk is if it doesn't happen.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The approved 2018 budget that was presented back in 2014 was created based on the 10-year long-term capital plan. Again, this is a very dynamic process, and because of rapid growth in the community, you see new schools coming online, transit routes are being modified to cope with demand, new recreational facilities are coming online, new neighborhoods are coming online. So the traffic is very dynamic, and drivers are changing patterns. For example, when we twin 92nd Street, when we twin 68th Avenue with the new bridge, you see a diversion of traffic. So it's very dynamic, and what we presented now in 2018 on the capital plan is the highest priorities that we consider appropriate to build in the different items, can be traffic signals or street lights or road overlays, under the 2018 conditions that are ever changing. So that's the answer. It's the best guess for our priority list in 2018 based on a 10-year capital horizon.
See the city manager?
Just if I can add to that, because I think it's time for us to have this discussion, because we're going to be going through everybody's capital budget the same way. I think it's fair to say in the review that management did in preparing the budget presentation as it sits right now, the review of the relative priority of all of the things that are in the approved capital plan and the relative priority of those things that were referred by committee was an active exercise by management. So there isn't anything in here that wouldn't be considered a priority in the same way that it was when it was entered into the plan in the first place. Having said that, council can be assured that not a single capital project will commence and be completed if it isn't needed. So as we go through 2018, if it's determined that there is no traffic volume at an intersection that was scheduled, management would not engage that project. And I'll just add one more thing that I know I keep making promises about 2018, but 2018 will introduce another level of reporting between management and council. It'll be channeled through the Corporate Services Committee, and it's what will be referred to as a capital budget variance reporting protocol. So every quarter, council will see every active capital project that's on the books and consuming resources for the city, or capable of consuming resources, in other words, approved. You'll see exactly where we are in terms of the execution of that project, what our current expectations are in terms of the total completed cost of that project and timeline. And in the event that projects ought to be canceled, every quarter when we go through that review, we'll actually cancel the projects and release that capital capacity back into the corporation. That report is not available right now, so I can certainly understand why there's an attraction to each.
Sure. Okay, thank you. If it's all right, Mayor Given, I have one more question.
Sure.
Thank you. Director Walker, can you...
Walker, he's going back in time.
Oh, geez.
A couple of quite a while.
Yes, absolutely. If you could tell me, the Director of Finance, if you could tell me the minimum allowable amount for the transportation levy reserve. And are we at 80% of capacity? What are the measurables in that reserve?
And just while Susan's getting ready, I'll also interrupt. That one's highly regulated reserve, which is probably something Susan would identify for us.
Thank you, Mayor Given. Yes, the Transportation System Levy Reserve does not have a maximum balance. It has a specific intended use. So it is built on, pardon me, it is built with development levies specific to transportation, new roads, new growth-related projects. So we can only use those funds for those specific purposes.
So how do we calculate the amount that goes in there? Based on what?
Mayor Given, each development application has a calculation and included in the agreement.
Okay. Thank you.
Just again, so that I'll clarify for my benefit and maybe for others as well. So the transportation system levy is funded by amounts that we collect from developers for a very specific list of pre-described projects. So I think the bylaw actually has a gigantic table of projects that we're allowed to use the levy for, and it's only those projects we can use the levy for. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mayor Given.
Thank you. Mr. City Manager?
Mr. Mayor, if I can make one more promise for 2018, particularly for the benefit of the new council members for whom these reserves have not been part of your past, every one of the reserves will be brought forward in a report by management to the Corporate Services Committee describing what its mandate is, what its terms of use is, what the targeted levels are. And as part of that exercise, we'll do an examination as to whether or not we're at the appropriate levels, both for the discrete reserves and for the overall corporation.
Thanks, Mr. City Manager. And just I see Councillor Platt, you've been waiting patiently, I see in the queue. Director Walker, and I'll use that. Thanks, Councillor Clayton, for the reminder. Yeah, you're right. No, well, you're talking to the protective services guy, and it's like he doesn't even have a mustache. Yeah. Susan Walker. Susan, can you highlight for us or the impact of changes to the approved capital plan on the property tax rate? Like what's the relationship between changes in the capital plan to the required property tax increase to fund the overall city budget?
Thank you, Mayor Given. So when we were developing our plan, we have built in no impact to capital projects, existing or recommended, to the bottom line of operating.
So if council deletes capital projects or includes capital projects, they won't have an impact on the property tax rate?
As long as you're not adding anything new.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Platt?
Thank you, Mayor Gibbon. Just to kind of, I guess, continue on Jackie's or Councillor Clayton's comments, I had flagged a couple traffic signals, and I'm just back to the comment earlier from the city manager about keeping it at a strategic and priority or a policy level. I guess what I'm wondering is, what is our policy now for what a traffic count would need before we deploy traffic lights? And I know we have to think out 10 years, but there's two intersections in particular that I just have a hard time thinking that we're ready for traffic lights on. And so it's, I realize it doesn't have an impact to our property taxes, but it's a deferral of $1.1 million. If we don't need to do it now, are we looking at doing this a snapshot in time that maybe that 1.1 million could be deployed somewhere else that's more of a need than maybe a long-term thinking? So I'm not sure if we're allowed to kind of flag a couple items, or if again that's going to come through priorities, or if I can maybe if I can have I'm trying to get as much reading and up to speed as quick as possible, but if there's some policies around traffic lights and where the checkpoint is that we have to deploy traffic lights with a certain amount of traffic pattern.
I'll redirect that in a second, and with we all deploy traffic lights. We're talking about deployment, but no, I'm just giving you a hard time. And with, if I'm just understanding your math, so you're basically referencing the 132nd Ave ones?
Yep, the 92nd Street, 132nd Ave, and the 92nd Street, 72nd Ave. They total $1.1 million.
Sure. And so to management, is there a point where we have a bit of a discussion about the impact of that, or is that something that administration provides to council? 'Cause we may have some details on that. So I'll look to the city manager and then Director Galante between the two of you.
Yeah, at a more focused level, Director Galante will get into the details, but I'll just reiterate that no capital projects will be undertaken unless there is a need, and the need would be gauged against what the policies and engineering principles are surrounding these types of projects within the community. So while they're identified here, they're not actually consuming capital, and they're not actually consuming capacity because we fund them through capital tax reserves or transportation levies in order to ensure that they don't cause spikes or valleys in the revenue requirement year to year. So the combination of the quarterly reporting, capital budget reporting that will go through, capital budget variance reporting that will go through Corporate Services Committee, the assurances that capital projects won't be undertaken unless they're absolutely necessary, and the observation that it doesn't affect the capacity of the organization to do other projects or to set a mill rate, I think ought to alleviate the concern at budget. But depending on Director Galante's more fulsome answer, if the council wanted to have a better understanding as to how we prioritize engineering projects of this nature in the community, so where do we get these standards from and how do we ascertain that this is something that would go forward if it's approved, that's something that would be channeled through Infrastructure and Protective Services Committee, find its way to council, and if it's sufficiently strategic and important, could even constitute a workshop to ensure that council gets familiar with what our protocols are.
Thank you. And I just had, just on the transportation system levy, I guess I'm curious on what happens, what our city looks like if we had 2 or 3 years in a row of no development. Because without transportation levies coming in from developers on future phases, what would happen to our transportation road rehab projects, and how would that affect it if we had a 2 or 3 year period of no development?
Okay.
Director Galante?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will respond first. The inquiry about the methodology we use to determine when a particular location is warranted for traffic control devices, not necessarily traffic signals, but any other traffic control device. There is a hierarchy on traffic control devices that may start at free flow intersection to a 2-way stop, to 3-way stop, 4-way stop, all the way up to signalization. Okay, so the engineering department via the traffic branch maintains a list of locations that we have permanent counts because of the cameras mounted on top of the signals. We're counting traffic constantly. We're measuring speed, we're counting traffic, and we're doing vehicle classification as well with the intelligent traffic system. So it's very easy to obtain statistical data constantly on the different roads. We have more than 300 cameras right now installed. It's a large volume of data that we are currently using. So the engineering department maintains a list of, I would say, between 15 to 20 intersections that are approaching the 100 level. 100 is the number that we use. That's a trigger point for signalization. Okay, so we monitor constantly intersections approaching, the 75, 80, 85, 90 level, and we keep an eye when they're reaching the triggering point. So having flexibility on the traffic signal component of the budget, not necessarily particular spot, because we can play with that. When the intersection approaches the number 100 on the warrant calculation, then is the time when it's decision point to go ahead and proceed. Okay, we take into consideration pedestrian activity in the area, so it's a complex methodology that can be presented if there's council interest via workshop or some sort of report to council, just for knowledge purpose. However, it's a very technical item, and the engineers are taking care of that. So rest assured that we monitor intersections, and when there is need, we will proceed with the installation of different types of traffic control devices. Okay. Second question is the transportation levy. What's happening with the transportation levy if we have 2 or 3 years with relatively low economic activity? So there is funding already in that area, and it's the transportation levy reserve is the criteria to incorporate or to transfer funds is very strict, and pretty much is used for increased capacity on arterial roads, for example, twinning roads to 3 or 4 lanes, and for traffic signal installation. But everything has to be related to growth. So if there's no new development, that means there is no new growth. That means the potential upgrades on the infrastructure on the roads are not needed. So if there is development that will generate more traffic on the roads, more congestion, we use generation and attraction models for traffic. So if there is a 200 lot subdivision with some commercial node in a particular spot, we calculate that that particular subdivision will incorporate, let's say, 3,000 vehicles per day in a particular road. We need another extra lane, and we need traffic signals on ABC intersection. Those upgrades are paid via transportation levy, and we're collecting the funds from the developer first. So they're like tied together, development and upgrades because of development.
Okay, maybe I was just misunderstood. I thought there was a certain portion of the transportation levy that went back into sidewalk and road rehab areas and older parts of Grand Prairie. So my apologies. I misunderstood.
That's correct. Yeah. Thank you.
Good question of clarification. Councillor Clayton?
Thank you, Mayor Given. Question for Director Walker. Am I correct in thinking, and sort of reiterating your conversation between you and Mayor Given, that although the capital projects have no property tax implications, if we choose not to do certain projects or we chose to fund certain capital projects with reserves, the outcome could potentially be a less than zero increase if we also took the zero operational route as suggested? So we don't, we reserve potential capital projects, or sorry, we fund potential capital projects with reserves, or we chose not to do certain ones out of the $25 million, and then we also took the option of 0% increases. We potentially could sit at a less than 0% increase on property taxes.
Director Walker?
Thank you, Mayor Given. The only way that would actually be able to be achieved is if you unfunded projects that are already in the capital plan that are funded by capital tax.
Right. Okay. Yep. I get it. Thank you.
And just to clarify that, what knock-on effect would that have into future years? Director Walker, can you speak to the knock-on effect that might have? Because that seems very similar with how we ended up at the 6-point-whatever% in 2018.
Yes, that the effect of that would actually reduce the tax base further, and so in 2019 we would likely have a larger requirement than would normally be the case.
Councilor Clayton?
Thank you, Mayor Given. However, there are some items that are funded. The funding source is identified as capital tax. And I know that was the preferred funding source, but it's potentially not the only funding source for some of them. There are some potential reserve funding sources for some of these, correct?
Thank you, Mayor Given. We have implemented a strategy, and that I'll be speaking to in my presentation, where we do switch some funding in capital projects. And so if I could get you just to wait until my section, and then I'll give you a more fulsome answer.
Thank you.
Thanks, Director Walker. Okay, Director Grande, are you still on?
Yes.
Where are we at here?
Okay.
I think we're at the Bear Creek.
Okay. So So I spoke about the first and second item on the list, and the third item that was referred by the former Community Safety Committee and recommended by management is an old landfill study on the Southbury Creek area. Because of environmental reporting requirements, we have responsibility to monitor that landfill since its closure back in the late 80s. So this study will delineate the perimeter of this landfill because it's unknown right now, and we discovered some organics during the construction of 68th Avenue, Twinning Road in the vicinity of that area. So we need better delineation of the perimeter of the landfill, and the determination of the cells, and analysis of the potential gases being generated on the landfill. So this amount is set aside for to conduct this study and come up with some measures to implement and to comply with our mandatory environmental obligations. Thank you. So the total amount of these referred items recommended by management is $2.14 million. There is another list that with items that were referred by the former Community Safety Committee and the previous year by City Council when we performed the mini budget review as well. So the two items are the road under the road category, the downtown rehabilitation and enhancement phase 3 and 4, and optional one block, 100th Street between 100th Avenue and 101st Avenue, and under the Crime Prevention Department, the Safe Growth grant.
So for management, at what point do we, so these will be items that will naturally come up on Friday?
That's managers.
I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, that if council sees these items as sufficiently strategic, that we identify that now and they will come up on Friday. As it turns out, phases 3 and 4, management was sufficiently familiar with the discussion and debate around council that we've got it on the list. But if you see any of the other ones that are not referred by management, they won't necessarily become strategic. This would be the time to discuss them.
So this would be the point to, if there are something in the not referred items that isn't already on the on the list for tomorrow's strategic items, the council feels that is a strategic level discussion, now would be the time to refer it. And so my question would be, is the, in what administration included for the downtown rehab that's already on for discussion tomorrow, was the communication program a part of that? Or do we need to take an action to highlight that for tomorrow? Director Galante?
Under the downtown project, yes, you have 4 different items on the list, and the communications plan for phase 3 and 4 is included as well, and that's a separate line item with a $250,000 budget, but I will consider that part of the package.
So we're going to talk about all that tomorrow anyways.
We are,
okay.
Yes.
Okay. Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Bill. Horacio, in regards to the Safe Growth Matching Grant, would that be the complete elimination of that program or a reduction in that program?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As Council may recall, the program started back in 2012 and was funded at $50,000 per year. Last year was reduced to $25,000 just for 1 year for 2017, and the promise to revisit this program at the end of the year. So I'm bringing back the concept here. It's not recommended by management because of the relatively small success. The Crime Prevention Department conducts safety audits based on CEPTEP principles, the crime prevention through environmental design principles, as a base to then recommend to the different businesses potential upgrades. Can be lighting, can be trimming, shrubs, or increasing visibility on door entrances, sometimes surveillance cameras, a variety of items to improve the security of the site. However, because this is a matching grant and the amount is that is provided via this grant is relatively small, it's $2,500. For example, to give an example, just one camera is about $5,000. So we noticed that businesses are doing the upgrades anyway. I have some split information here about, for example, how many businesses for profit have been applied for this and non-for-profit in total. So, for example, not-for-profit over the years since inception of the program, $90,000 were used for non-for-profit and $58,000 for profit. So what we found really useful is to continue conducting safety audits. Those are conducted by, for free by the crime prevention team. They take about 1 week. There is a day audit, night audit, and a series of recommendations. But then the businesses are incorporating those recommendations on the sites. So it's a relative success, and we feel that it's better to keep utilizing the time for the safety audits, and that's the main reason of not recommending this. Thank you.
Okay, so then the whole program would be shut down.
Right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. So if we're going to discuss downtown project as part of strategic items tomorrow, I will just move to my summary slide just to conclude my presentation. This is pretty much the summary on the capital plan, what is already embedded into the 2018 capital plan is the approved column. And then under the recommended, this is new items, the 3 items, the landfill study, land acquisition, and safety audits for $2.1 million. And then non-recommended items on the capital, the $25,000 for crime prevention and $33,250,000 for the downtown phase 3 and 4. And this is the larger summary on the operating side and the capital side, and summarizing pretty much the conversation this morning. And with this slide, I conclude my presentation on the operating and capital budgets for the Infrastructure and Protective Services Division. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Director Galante. Any questions at the divisional level for Director Galante? Seeing none, we had lots of good dialogue as we went through there. I was just conferring with the city manager, so we're actually ahead of agenda. So are we at a point where we could, we're not scheduled to take break for lunch until noon. Are we at a point where we could continue on with the community living operational presentation? And then we'll break for lunch at lunch, take about a half an hour, and then continue on. Mr. City Manager?
I think that would be ideal, Mr. Chairman. We can move directly into community living. I have had a couple of requests that we take 20 minutes to a half an hour just to give people a bit of a break, but not take the full hour. So we're essentially working through lunch, but that'll give people a chance to swallow a sandwich.
Okay. Well, if we get a chance, if we can start with community living presentation now, which was scheduled for after lunch, I think we'll be moving through pretty quickly. And so with that, Director Miyagi, are you prepared to go?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am ready. We'll just get the slide deck showing. And maybe just as to preamble, I will be following the very similar sequence to Director Galante's presentation. And so if I can have, there we go. Okay, we can move on to the base scenario. So this is the operating budget. And once again, it's what we're trying to do is to achieve the 4.2%. The first item there, the Leisure Center, we are proposing a $95,000 cut or reduction. And those are essentially they're savings from various expense lines that we have. They're a series of general reductions that accumulated to that. Some of the things that were identified were like some salary savings that we had in the past and things like general supplies. We totaled all that and it accumulated to $95,000 at the Leisure Center. We think it's a relatively low impact to the Leisure Center, these cuts. The next one is parks. It's a little bit bigger, but then Parks does have a overall bigger budget. About you add everything together, it's about $5 million. And so once again, this is a collective savings from the overall Parks operations budget. They identify things like general supplies and general equipment savings. Some material purchases that will be reduced slightly, some strategic delays and adjustments in buying certain things will result in this reduction. I'll continue. Dave Barr, similar again. This is a hard relook at the operating budget, and we've come up with general savings from things like supplies and materials. There is a slight reduction in or savings generated from the seasonal staffing that they have there, and there has been some or there will be some slight restructuring of staff levels that will result to contribute towards those savings. Coca-Cola Center, slightly moderate savings, and looking at their overall budget again, the $36,000 constitutes general savings from staff overtime. There's been some adjustments to the janitorial shifts that has resulted in some savings that will resonate to $36,000. Muscasipi Park, once again, general savings from supplies and materials, and they have looked at some shift savings from part-time staff. CSD, this is once again as well general savings from going through all their budgets. No one particular account took a big hit, but a cumulative on things like supplies, some travel and mileage savings. There has been some marketing reductions, proposed marketing activity reductions for CSD. Custodial services, that's a service that's funded out of culture and heritage, and this general savings is coming from reduction in overall custodial hours, some of the custodial supplies and materials that they get, and they've looked at reducing overtime by combining custodial service efforts from the different departments that have custodial. There's been some general savings generated there. Recreation and sport, this one will have some savings. Generally speaking, they did look at all the budgets as well. Some things out of this one, they've identified not being able to look at sponsoring some of the provincial or higher events that that we may look at in the past, but it wouldn't be a substantial reduction. So there'd be a reconsideration of some of those opportunities. Montrose Cultural Center, this is once again general savings that the manager there has looked at, and with myself, there is a slight rental revenue projection that will contribute towards those savings, and there is a position that we looked at that we would reclassify that would contribute towards those savings. Heritage Resources, Once again, overall savings from the various accounts. Some of the accounts that were highlighted were travel and general supplies, and then some summer staff hour reduction and savings there. In the service center, we would look at general efficiencies towards how they conduct yard maintenance and reducing some of the maintenance costs that they do on a regular basis to generate those savings. In total, we are looking at a little over $900,000, and with that budget adjustment, we're looking at $34,015,000. Okay, we'll go through to scenario 3. So in the overall scheme of things, looking at where community living would contribute towards the 3% scenario, we are removing 1 FTE from a community living department. And I've purposely not identified which one that is, but we do have one if we need to take that particular one. And that'll result in a $100,000 savings. In the 0% scenario, these numbers, I can say that at this level, there will be a general reduction of the services to the public. Some staffing hours will be looked at, and it could impact service levels in some of the departments. You'll see things like reduction in some parks maintenance, less trees, those kind of things. So as I go through, the first item is the director's budget. That particular amount, $94,000, so that is from the community living director's budget, where we were funding a couple of special projects, and we would reduce that funding and look at reallocating that or funding that from somewhere else within. Which will result in approximately $94,000. Parks will look at a little bit.
Director Miyagi, I see Councilor Bressi.
Sorry, could you give me an idea of those special projects? Just an example of what those are?
Yes. So without going into detail, as it can identify individuals that are working in there, we do have
sorry, Director Miyagi, there may be a couple of questions about that as we go through. And so I wonder if there'll be a point where maybe council can, in your own notes, I've done the same, maybe we can highlight these for a bit of a in-camera discussion with the CAO. So we can ask about process around getting additional details like this. Can we, Mr. City Manager, could we do that maybe just before we conclude for lunch? Go in camera, have a little bit of a discussion on how council can get the level of information that they might like to have on some of these things.
Certainly.
If appropriate. So don't lose it.
Yep,
mark it. And we'll have a bit before we break for lunch. Council will go in camera with the CAO or with management to have a discussion about how we can get those level of details as we get into the the 3% and 0% scenarios, which might have more direct impact on the organization.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will continue then. So with parks, there will be more reduction in services throughout all divisions of parks, so they would result in larger cuts. There's a good chunk of it that we are looking at from Parks Administration, so that is an internal cut. But then there will be some general materials, such as topsoil or construction materials. There will be less trees purchased and less trees replaced. Some of the other things would be less mosquito and pest control. We wouldn't cut it, but they would just be reduced. Same with the weed control. And then you would see some general less mowing of the green spaces overall. That would result in that. Coca-Cola Center, just a bit more modest cut. They would reduce some summer hours. which is of not high use anyways, but we would reduce some of that. There'll be less custodial support that we would fund and reduce overtime for ICE and custodial staff.
Director Miyagi, I see a couple councillors in the queue. Councillor Bressie first.
Yeah, I totally respect the need to have some conversations in camera, but there's also some levels of detail here that I'd like to get a better idea of. I'm hearing the word less a lot, but I don't know what that means. Less mowing, does that mean, I know we've got some parks that we mow every 2 weeks. Does that mean all of those are going up to every 3 weeks? Does that mean we're mowing less space, less mosquito pest control? What's a percentage of that? It's just, I'm trying to quantify what the actual public outward-facing service reductions are if we're looking at a 0% basis, and I'm having troubles getting a gauge on that.
Yeah, no, fair question, and certainly that one completely appropriate. You know, just I guess when we start to talk about program areas, that may have an impact on HR. When we're talking about level of delivery of a program, you know, when we're saying a reduction in level of service, I think that's a fair question for the public sort of realm. Director Miyagi.
Through the chair, it is in the magnitude of overall $200,000. So I can't give you an exact percentage, but in terms of the costs, for example, when the magnitude wouldn't be necessarily that you would see weeds and grass everywhere, because we haven't maintained it, but we would be strategic in identifying some of the lower use areas and try to minimize some of those. So, and this isn't an exact quote, but if we were maintaining a particular boulevard that's perhaps close to the outskirts of town, and there wasn't as high public use, and we were mowing it 3 times a week, maybe that would be reduced to 2 times a week, like those kind of things. And so we would prioritize the key areas so that we would minimize the impact to the public.
Okay, I see Councillor Palat.
Thank you, Mayor Given. Excuse me. On the Coca-Cola Center, we have, just between the 2 scenario budgets, it looks like we're reducing about $62,000. And I'm assuming that was, again, based on maybe the 2018 budget, because when I look at the 2017 budget for the Coca-Cola Center, we're actually increasing funding by $203,984, or almost just over 19%. So even though there's reductions, we're still increasing the spending for 19% for Coca-Cola. I'm just wondering what's the increased spending for, and why, and the necessity of it.
Director Miyagi.
Thank you, through the chair, and I may need to get Susan to help me out here as well. Coca-Cola Center, amongst the other departments that generate revenue, has been looked at with some economic adjustment based on the conditions, and so there's been some relief of revenue there that then will result in a appearance of a general increase of the funding that's there. And perhaps I can default to Susan to maybe elaborate that a little bit further if needed. Pardon?
Director Walker, do you want to? Looks like you've got some detail that you can provide.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I don't have the exact number of the economic impact that was made for Coca-Cola Center. I believe it was in the range of,
I got it somewhere,
$200,000, but that is an estimate. So I'll endeavor to get that exact number for you.
And and when you're looking at that, does that economic sort of adjustment, does it also account for things like predicted increases in utility rates, or like, is that, especially with a venue like this, I imagine that may be a part of the picture. And so what impact do increased utility costs have? And is that something that's captured in the overall departmental budget?
Those economic adjustments did encapsulate all of those types of adjustments, yes.
Okay. And so you'll get back to us with some details on what those are.
Yes.
overarching or foundational level adjustments were, so council gets a sense of why that department would, why any department would see an increase, even though there are program reductions.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's, I guess that, the 19%, it's a large increase. And I guess the other thing with that, we've heard from our city manager that we're also going to be doing a review of rates for across the board of our user groups. So I'm assuming, if there's been an economic change in how much the use of this facility is happening, there might be also an economic change of whether the rates are still the same rates that have maybe been in other areas that haven't changed for 5 or 10 years. So yeah, I'm very concerned that we're moving a line item up by 19%, is all, even with a 0%.
Thanks, Councillor Platt. And the city manager has something to add.
Yes, the unfavorable economic adjustment that was made to adjust the revenue expectation from Coca-Cola Center for 2018 was $261,678, so about $262,000. And that was a result of the experience that occurred in 2017 as user groups moved to other options and frequency of operations went down. These are areas that we're attempting to adjust through a number of measures, including a fairly aggressive marketing program to get people back in. It's where our user fee review will be targeting to make sure that we haven't walked ourselves out of a price point that find people desiring to use the Coca-Cola Center. But that's the $262,000 was the adjustment that was made for this year's budget.
And I guess if we leave it at the number that's on the budget here, because it doesn't change whether it's 4.2 or 3% or 0%, that target budget seems. Are we confident that the quality of level of service and will be there at that number?
Director Miyagi?
Through the chair, yes, we are.
Okay, Director Miyagi, nobody else in the queue?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I will continue with the next item, which is Muskogee Park. We are looking at a little bit more digging deeper into our general cuts. Where we're going to be, part of that contribution would be to reduce the front counter hours slightly. We would be looking at some overtime reduction and a little less maintenance on site and less custodial service on site as well. In the CSD...
Right, I see Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Bill. Director Miyagi, in regards to the Muskogee Park, I know you listed out the reduction in hours, front counter service, overtime. Does that also include reductions to programming as well?
Through the chair, at this time we wouldn't be looking at reduction in programs. If we need to start to dip into reducing seasonal staff and whatnot, some of that could be impacted. But at this stage, we're looking still to keep the reductions internal.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So moving on, CSD, we're looking at some reductions in some of the events that they do. That's not a big portion of it, but there will be less home visitations. And those are, when I say less, we're not reducing the staff, but things like travel, time, allocations are going to be reduced. The mileage that's provided, those things will be impacted. And there'll be a slight reduction in the activities in the youth side as well. And those are smaller pieces, but every area did get a review and resulted in the combination of approximately $60,000 of cuts. Custodial
Bressy?
So once again, I'm struggling with this language of there's going to be less home visitations and less youth and reduction in youth. It doesn't sound, with no reduction in staff, it doesn't sound like there's confidential matters here. So I'm wondering, is that quantified at all in terms of how many home visitations are we doing? What are we looking like? I respect for cutting staff that we can't talk about that in this very public venue, but I'd still like to bit more quantification to that less.
Dr. Miyagi.
Yes, thank you, through the chair. And when I say less, it is less. It has to be less. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to get the cuts. Now, with that said, we looked very carefully on the services that we were providing. And so, for example, in the youth services, we were looking at $1,000 reduction in their overall budget. In the home support, we didn't say reduction in services in terms of staff, because staff are required to have their caseloads. And if we reduce the staff, there would be a number of people that may not receive that service. So what we have looked at, and I had asked the manager to look at there as, is there a way that we may be able to have longer visitation time so they're not traveling as much, or looking at things like, can you make multiple appointments and reduce your travel? Those kind of strategies have been applied here.
Awesome. Thank you, Director Miyagi.
Thank you. Then I'll continue. In the custodial services, we are looking at, in this particular one, there will be reduction in staff hours. So therefore that'll result in less cleaning shifts. That'll be it's $26,000, so there'll be some reductions overall in the year. Recreation and sport. So this will be, once again, a little bit more of the sporting event sponsorship activities. We would reduce a little bit of that. And those are the national and the provincial ones. A little bit more of not pursuing perhaps some of those national or provincial level ones. We'll still focus on the local ones and regional. There was a slight savings in the neighborhood matching grants this year. There was a report that recently went to committee, and there was a reduction of, or there was about $15,000 not used this year, and based on that information, we're slightly reducing that particular account. That'll result in the total amount there of $34,000. Excuse me. Montrose Cultural Center, the majority of the contribution there is that we will be looking at redefining the one of the positions there, so it'll likely go into a part-time mode rather than a full-time, and then other savings, general savings such as supplies, some advertising. We would reduce a little bit of the security contract we have. We would still have security there, but just make it a little bit more strategic in how we apply those funds. Heritage Resources, this one would be a reduction in the summer staffing positions, so it could impact some of the outward facing opportunities that we may have there at that facility. And then there would be some general maintenance and general reductions in some of the supply and maintenance there. Lastly, the service center, we would suspend or reduce the yard maintenance work that's being provided at the service center, and some of the building improvement initiatives may be delayed or could be relooked at and perhaps cut as well to the tune of $30,000. So in total, okay, well, it wasn't quite there yet, but that's okay.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. In total, there was a reduction of $640,000 that we'd be looking at, and so the adjusted budget from that would be a little over $33 million. Then if we can go to the scenario. Just as a recap, we have looked at the base, the 3% and the 0%, and I won't go through those in detail again, but similar to Director Galante's presentation, the yellow highlights the bright yellow highlights the 3%, and then the other yellow is the additional reductions at the 0%.
I see Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Mayor Given. We never got touched in the scenarios here, but I'm just curious with Eastlink Center. We had a 2017 budget of 4.13 million, and now the budget moves up with the 0 scenario. In all the scenarios, it moves up by 34% and almost $1.5 million. So we're running an operation of $5.8 million for our portion of the Eastlink Center, which I think would equate to about a 42% utilization, if I'm correct on that. I'm just concerned that this number hasn't changed a whole bunch from what happened last year, and with all the changes we made in the economy, hopefully moving forward and user rates being looked at, this just seems like a large increase year over year, 34%, 1.5 million. And if I could just maybe get some more clarification of why we're moving that up by almost $1.5 million.
Dr. Miyagi?
Thank you. Through the chair, the Eastlink Center is another department that we looked at and made some economic adjustments. The review that I did there with some other folks, we saw that the revenue projections that were provided originally were quite high, and so Susan may be able to add a little more to this if required. Is there's been about $1 million in terms of revenue that we have relaxed from the original budget or from the projected budget that was to go to 2018. We have looked at the efficiencies there, and based on those figures, we are confident that we can achieve the net budget that's projected for 2018.
See the city manager as well.
Perhaps I don't even need to jump in. Director Miyagi did cover it quite well. The actual revenue, or the adjusted revenue base for Eastlink Center going into 2018 as a result of the economic conditions and the current level of utilization in the community, is a reduction of $1.2 million. So they started out resetting the budget, the revenue budget, at $1.2 million lower than it had been. That's a combination of both the experience that occurred in 2018 arising from the troubles that we had in operating the facility, and what I would suggest would have been overly optimistic revenue projections right from the beginning at Eastlink Center, given the fee structures that were involved and the practical utilizations in the community. We undertook a comprehensive multidisciplinary look at Eastlink Center using what we refer to as a foreman-fold team internally, to see whether we could get some perspective as to why we ran into such serious problems twice in that operation of that facility. And a big part of it was that the original projections of cost and revenue that had been built into the multi-year budgeting was just not achievable given the current set of rates.
So my natural question, I guess, as a business person is, if we're seeing a drop of $1 million in revenue, where's the drop in the expenses to correlate that with? I guess is for some clarification, if we're going to have less people through the facility, should we not need less staff to manage the facility? I understand that, lifeguards, that there's a certain ratio we have to meet and achieve. I'm sorry, I'm just having a really hard time that we're still at a $5.8 million loss for a facility, which would put us at around a 42% utilization rate. And I guess in my personal business experiences, I feel like when you set a budget that's really easy to attain, it's one thing. I don't know if I feel like we're being aggressive enough on what we need this number to look like to really reflect what the community needs. I feel like we're still overfunding here a little bit, and that's just maybe my opinion, but $5.8 million for this facility just seems like it's an unrealistic ask in my opinion.
Mr. City Manager?
Not inappropriate, through the chair, not inappropriate comments at all. and they are based on your feelings and your level of knowledge in the facility to this point. What we have undertaken to do in 2018 is a comprehensive review that will be brought back forward to City Council on Eastlink Centre. The basic question that we have to ask ourselves is, to what level ought a facility like Eastlink Centre be funded from user fees versus tax base? And once that's set properly and reflects the expectations of this council, then aggressive performance management to achieve those objectives needs to be instilled into the management team at all levels. The problem that we have, in my estimation, at this point is we don't have a good feel for what an appropriate level of tax-supported revenue or tax-supported subsidy into the Eastlink Centre ought to be. And so we've been swinging Eastlink Centre around for several years now with unrealistic expectations of financial performance. If we tried in a short term just to more closely match expenditures to expected revenue, we would see what had happened during the latter part of, or the early part of 2017, which was essentially trying to cut costs, cut spontaneous use because it's expensive, try to bring the expenses back into line with the revenue. There's nothing wrong with that strategy, but it ought to be targeting something that this council or that a council has determined to be an appropriate level of funding. That just hasn't been determined yet, and I think it still warrants more close examination and judgment by council.
Okay. So thank you. I guess in closing on this, again, tough decisions, not fun stuff. When I'm looking at the 2017 budget as the benchmark, we still would increase it at 0%. We'd increase funding to this department by 2.55%. And including that, we've added almost $1.7 million to Coke Centre and Eastlink Centre in that budget of an increase of 2.55%. So just my closing comments on it.
Thanks, Councillor Platt. Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Bill. Director Miyagi, just in regards, I guess I'm going to go with the theme of swimming pools again. We have the Beach Bear Creek Pool. Currently, it's slated to not change significantly between any of the reductions of the targets. But my concern is around whether or not we'll have we have budgeted appropriate staff and operational expenses for that facility once it's up and running. Does that $227,000 for total operations, does it justify itself once that building's up and running?
Director Miyagi.
Thank you. Through the chair, we took a very close look at that particular budget as we were putting it together. Went through probably 3 renditions of it, and we feel that's a good amount. We do see opportunities there that will generate revenue, as well as people are. We get the sense that people are wanting to use that facility once it reopens. So yes, we are confident that that number would be adequate.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Bressy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. My apologies if this has been answered elsewhere while I was rifling through my binder. This is especially for the Eastlink Centre, but I think applies to other facilities too. I am hopefully optimistic that we're going to see an uptake in usership and revenue generation, both as our economy picks up and as we've had some pivots in management. I was wondering, as we're forecasting revenue, especially with the Eastlink Centre, is that forecast building in just a steady membership? Is there some assumed increase that's built into that model?
Director Miyagi.
Through the chair, the short answer is yes. And if I could just speak to where we are at now. So since the summer, so since July, and we've looked at seriously we seriously looked at how we are staffed there, some of the challenges that we had faced in the past, and re-looking at how we offer service. We are trending positively since the summer. We've been able to achieve close to $500,000 in recovery from where we thought we would be at in the summertime to now. So our estimation of our membership increasing and our drop-in numbers going up is favorable for the new year. And our revenue strategies are threefold. One is to increase membership to anybody and everybody that wants to participate there. Two is to make it viable for people to drop in. And then the last one, we are cognizant of the loss of membership there. So we also want to focus our attentions on people that have left, and perhaps they left the municipality, and so those ones won't come back. But we also want to focus some of our energies on seeing if we can have people come back, the ones that have dropped the membership. And we're hoping to see if they would be interested in coming back. Our strategies are focused towards value added, and we are also looking at making the facility a community center approach, an opportunity, not just in recreation, but a place to go and place to spend some time. So those are the focuses that we're shooting towards for 2018 and on.
Which I appreciate, and that's why I'm hopefully optimistic we're going to see an uptake in membership. But I'm just wondering what's been built into the financial models we've got here. So if we, specifically what I'm asking is, if we don't see that hope for increase in membership, are we going to see a big deficit in the Eastlink Center budget line? Conversely, if we do see an uptake in membership, or we can see some savings here, just what assumptions are built into the financial model of the Eastlink Center in terms of our membership and our revenue?
Councilor Bessie, just if I can paraphrase, just to make sure. So are you specifically asking for what are the underlying revenue assumptions for Eastlink Center in 2018? What is the revenue difference in 2018 over 2017? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that would be one way of putting it. Specifically, what I'm trying to figure out is, say we have 500 new members sign up in the first quarter, 500 annual memberships. That's going to be a significant revenue source to the Eastlink Center. I don't know what our assumptions are about increased memberships, but I'm trying to figure out, have we assumed that those are going to go up in these financial models? Basically, I'm trying to get a sense of, is the Eastlink Center, I'm trying to get a sense of this projection that we've got of the net cost of the Eastlink Center. How optimistic is our view of that uptake membership? Does that make sense? So I'm trying to rephrase it. How attainable are these numbers for the Eastlink Center? How much are we being optimistic? How much are we being pessimistic?
Director Miyagi?
Through the chair, we are very optimistic, or we are very confident that these figures are going to be very accurate to what we can generate as revenue. Given the numbers that we are seeing now and the efforts that we're putting in, along with some of the efficiencies that we're going to look at in the operations, or continue to look at, we think that revenue number is quite doable.
So I guess a specific way to get at what I'm asking is, our current memberships, my understanding, are about 3,000 right now, give or take?
Through the chair, currently we're sitting at about 4,500.
Awesome. So are your revenue numbers, so if we're sitting at 4,500 memberships right now, are your revenue numbers assuming in December 2018 we'll have 4,500 members? Are they assuming we'll have more members than that? What's your assumption in terms of membership for 2018 that went into building this budget?
Director Miyagi.
Through the chair, this is our targeted assumption, but we're hoping to achieve back to 6,000 or 7,000 members. That's what it was about 2 years ago, and it is ambitious. If we come around 6,000 members, I believe we would be very good in our revenues. Now, our membership revenues, we are hoping to see targeting about $200,000 to $250,000 increase to where we're at today. Our drop in revenues, we're hoping to see that increase of a similar amount, about $200,000 to about $300,000 in drop in revenues. So that's our target for 2018.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Clayton.
Thank you, Mayor Given. Question for Director Miyagi. You may have already mentioned this, but I was flipping through pages. The 2017 budget for Eastlink was 4.3. First part of my question is, where will it end up?
Director Miyagi.
Thank you, through the chair. So if I can understand your question, perhaps I can answer it this way. We're hoping to achieve about over 50% recovery. And so if our net budget, or if our expense budget is 11 million, we're hoping to achieve half of that or a little bit more. So as a conservative target, ideally, if we can achieve 60%, that would be that would be very very good.
So are you pretty close in line with the 5.8 that you're projecting for 2018?
Yes, we would be.
So I can appreciate how tough a budget will be for you for 2018 when you're doing what I hope is a really deep look into operational services. And as you mentioned, you're going to be revamping as things go along in 2018. And to Councillor Bressy's comments in regards to, where are the obtainable goals and is it obtainable? I'm curious, is this a conservative budget or, it's 5.8 across the board, regardless of what impact it has at 0%, 3%, or 4.2. So if we were smoking busy and you doubled your membership, are you going to get 5.8, or are you conservatively, with a, what you say is an obtainable increase, going to get 5.8?
Through the chair, we are optimistic and we are highly confident that those revenue targets are accurate.
Okay. Thanks, Director Miyagi. Was there anything else to close off the operational section of the community living division? Director Miyagi, anything further to close off that area?
No, not on the operations side, Mr. Mayor. We can proceed to capital.
Well, I think so we're just at noon now, an appropriate time for us to break. But before we do that, as discussed before, maybe we can have a bit of a discussion before we start a lunch at an in-camera level about process for discussing some of these other items. The city manager has some context to be able to share. So could I get a motion to go in camera? Councillor Clayton? Thanks very much. I'll call for the vote to go in camera. Please vote. Thank you. And that motion is carried. So we will move to in camera. So we'll turn off our broadcast system.